Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well in the back? Or should it be still a little bit louder? Okay? Okay, cool. Perfect. Good evening, sorry. I'm Tim. In the next 40 minutes, it's all about creating a lightweight version of your website and serving them to your users whenever they request it. So, next to my day job at Akamai, I also run the largest scale modeling website in the world, like building small airplanes, building small cars. No worries, you don't have, I will not show you the hobby. But what I'll do is basically in 7 steps, explain how I created a lightweight version and delight my users whenever they request it. So, how do users request a lightweight version? Is they give a signal to the web server and they send a request header called save data equals on. Now, how do they send this? For example, in Chrome you have a data saver mode. In Yandex and in Opera it's called turbo mode, and it's basically you toggle it on and then the browser sends that additional header. What happens if you're on an HTTP website? The browser does some magic. If you have an HTTPS website, nothing happens unless you do something. And that's unless you do something, that's what I will basically now explain. Now, just to show you the end of the story, whenever the data saver mode is set, I serve 50% less data to an iPhone user. And I have my scale modelers are there across the globe, the UK, everywhere in the world. And some users really look into the website from, let's say, a satellite phone or plenty of different connection types, and for them it really matters. So now let's look at 7 steps. Am I still speaking loud enough for everybody? Cool. So step 1. Now before I build this version, lightweight version, you need to spend a lot of time. I'm a one-man company, so when my wife falls asleep in front of the television and my 2 kids are in bed, I start playing around with the website. So the first thing I want to do is I heard about data saver, how many users actually ask for it? If it's just 1, bad luck. If it's a lot, I might look at it. So what did I do is in JavaScript you have the navigator.connection.saveData. If you type that in, you get either on or off or no value if the browser does not support it yet. So what you see here is I use this data and I'm using, next to Google Analytics, I'm using Impulse Run for performance monitoring. And I track this as an additional value. So you see that around 50% of the browsers of my visitors actually expose the header. 10% of these users, which was actually more than I expected, actually say, please, please, please send me less data. Now, typically when you hear save data, you hear developing countries. Now, if you look at the top list, that's for my website only. You see Italy, Netherlands, Germany, United Kingdom. That's not typically what I would say as developing countries. Now, key is Brazil, you see here Brazil, Venezuela. When I look at my users from Brazil and Venezuela, yes, the amount of users, percentage-wise, is bigger who send the headers. Now, of course, most of my visitors are United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands. A lot of them still send that header. So it's not just about, even if your website is just for the domestic UK market, you should still investigate if it's worth potentially the effort. Next thing is, it's probably like if you have bad connections or bad phones. Here I also track the device pixel ratio. So that's like on an Apple phone you have Retina screen, so that has a device pixel ratio of 2. The newer iPhones actually have a device pixel ratio of 3, and some Samsung phones even have a device pixel ratio of 4. So what do you see? When it's turned on, device pixel ratio of 3, that's like not a cheap phone. So what is it typically is? It's not because you have an expensive phone that your monthly budget or subscription actually allows you to have a lot of data. Sometimes, for example, my neighbor's kids, they get the old phone from their parents, but they still have the cheap, let's say the cheap subscription. So it's not just about old phones and developing countries. New phones in the UK might have the same thing. So that was it. I decided I need to do something. And the first step you can do is actually make your desktop version as small as possible Why? Because every byte you save in the full desktop version will make the next steps easier. Just a quick highlight. So what can you do? Apply browser caching, gzip, Brotli compression, remove unwanted headers. Andrew, you're a big fan of removing unwanted headers. Get rid of those. Enable HTTP2, optimize your images, a lot of stuff which is typically well known in the web performance industry. So I did all this. Now, what is the advantage of when you save data? When I say, oh, if you get rid of that header, you save 5 bytes, performance-wise, might have 0 impact. Now, when you're looking at saving bytes, every byte matters. No matter, like, if you track it on mobile, desktop, whatever country you check it, every byte you get rid of, you save. So that's an exercise I did. Here, I did all the basics. What I did here is my website used jQuery and jQuery UI. It's like a framework, easy development, but there was some overhead. So what did I do is I got rid of jQuery UI and changed it to vanilla.js. This also allowed me to upgrade jQuery from an old version to a newer version, which is smaller in size, again, saving bytes. So here you see that on the JavaScript transfer size, that's how many bytes you ship to the end user, not how large the JavaScript is unzipped. You see that I win 20%. Who knows this tool? Yellow Lab? Awesome. So it's a nice tool, it's free. And what it does is you put in your website and it gives you a lot of ratings. Like, did you use duplicate CSS selectors? Did you use too heavy fonts? Where are some image optimizations? What are some, let's say, JavaScript code, et cetera, et cetera. Have a look at this, and it can really help you finding some bytes and also improve the performance. Now, this is not from my website. My website, everything is perfectly green. But this is actually from a UK website. So maybe, depending on who you are, it might actually be your website. So that was step 2. So far, we didn't do anything special, right? How many users are there? We did some optimizations, best practices. Now let's do some smart detection. Now, smart detection is a bit exaggerated. So my backend runs on PHP, and I check, is there an incoming header called save data? If it's equal to on, I say save data is enabled, yes, otherwise false. Nothing special. Now, I do like to test web page test, page speed insights, and not all of these tools actually have the possibility to modify the headers. So what did I do? I have the option to enforce the save data mode, either by adding a get variable or by setting a cookie. This also allows me to, for my end users who have browsers who don't support save data mode, to actually enable them via a cookie to still get that low, let's say that low version. Nothing special here. So, step 4, we're going quickly. Removing content is a great way to save bytes. Now let's look at some of the options you have. Related articles. Every website has related articles. E-commerce, other products. If you're newspaper, other articles. So in my full version, and the light version. So in my full version, I sometimes show up to 40 related articles. When I do that simple, smart, is data saver enabled, I override the related articles to 15. Does it matter? In the end, it's just a thumbnail. But yeah, let's say a thumbnail is 6 kilobytes, 25 thumbnails saved, it's 150 kilobytes, straight away gone. Now here is a dilemma, because in theory, if I put it to 10, I save more bytes. If I put it to 20, I save less bytes. So you need to find that balance between saving bytes and still have a usable website. The alternative is getting rid of your thumbnails. Do you actually need those thumbnails? For example, for a newspaper saying Trump visits China, do you really need to see that picture of Trump? No. On my website, this was not possible because scale modeling is like very visual, and without the images, the website does not say anything. So that was not an approach I could take. Infinite scroll, easy. You have a page, and when you scroll down, you scroll down, you scroll down, you scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. At a certain point in time, before you reach the end of the page, what happens? You request and you do an Ajax call for additional content. And then that page becomes longer. Now, how can you play with it with data saver mode? And this is when you look at performance. Ideally, you trigger this request as soon as possible so the user does not see that content being loaded. Now, from a data saver perspective, if I trigger this request too early, you consume bytes which you might not need. So what did I do? When data saver mode is enabled, I wait longer before requesting that additional request. Instead of 500 pixels, only 200 pixels. And instead of sending straight away 15 additional articles, I limit it to 10. The alternative is disabling that altogether and really have the user at the end say load more, load more, load more. I decided not to do it because it's the end, again, usability versus saving bytes, and that's everyone's choice. Make sense? Cool. Remove non-crucial content. Look at your website and you'll see plenty of non-crucial content. Like on my website, you see the amount of users online. What is the value? In the end, not really. So I just, in data saver mode, I get rid of it. Saving X amount of thumbnails, X amount of bytes in the HTML, which is potentially negligible. Now look, for example, in your footer on the homepage. Or footer, you see probably 5 logos of sister websites, 7 payment providers you provide. There's plenty of content. Do you really need it? No. Get rid of it. You save a lot of bytes. Another more complex. Does somebody spot the difference between the top and the bottom screenshot? Icons. So I use Font Awesome as an icon set. Now that consumes bytes. So I decided, well, you know what? When it's data saver mode, I just write the label instead of consuming X amount of bytes for Font Awesome. Now, then looking in web page test and looking in my run data, I still saw that stupid Font Awesome file being loaded. What happened is I had another optimization called preload, which says I need this file. And I forgot initially to remove that preload. So what happened is I just shipped those bytes to the data saver version while I don't use it. So have a look at that as well. Advertising, easy. Instead of 10 advertising slots, limited to 5, limited to 2. That's an easy thing to play with. Video, what can you do with video except for reducing the bytes? Autoplay. Autoplay consumes a lot of bytes, and maybe the user doesn't need to see it. So the only thing I do is I remove this autoplay button. If this data saver mode, remove autoplay. Very easy thing to do. Performance here. Low quality image placeholders. Who heard about this already? Now in theory, I ship more bytes because this low quality image placeholder is 3 to 4 kilobytes. I inject it as a let's say as a data element inside the page. Now purely from a data perspective, I ship too many bytes. So I decided to get rid of the low quality image placeholder to save some bytes. I only have a low quality image placeholder on the hero image. I don't have it on all the thumbnails below the fold because that's wasted bytes anyway. Key is, doesn't matter if you're using a CDN or if you're using Varnish in the backend or Memcache, whatever, is as soon as you have multiple versions of the homepage, multiple versions of that sidebar, multiple versions of the footer, make sure that you have separate cache keys. Otherwise, you see like mixed content, a user seeing a footer, let's say the header in full mode and then the footer in low mode. That doesn't look good. Step 5, purely from a timing perspective, I'm lost track of time just to check. Good, perfect. Step 5. A key thing where you can really save a lot of bytes are images. Especially on my website. Scale modelers, when I had images of quality 90, they would scream at me like, hey Tim, I uploaded this nice picture of a cockpit and you can't see the details I added because you start adding some pixely things. So my images were big, 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 big. Now in data saver mode, that's like not easy. So what are some options serving lower quality? And here again, it's a trade-off between bytes, performance, and speed. You can create like very small images in the lowest quality, but nobody uses the website. So it's like a trade-off everybody needs to make. I have a product, so I have in my database more than 1 million different articles. So it means more than 1 million of these little thumbnails. And that's like a default image tag. Now, quality is key, so I serve high resolution images to 2x devices, 3x devices, and 1.5x devices. So here you see the source set element. And what does that basically mean is, instead of the standard thumbnail, I have multiple versions of that thumbnail. Now, if you're looking at 3x, that means a thumbnail of 480 pixels. If you remember 50 thumbnails of 480 pixels, that's a lot of data. So what are your options? So by default, I serve 160, 240, 320, 480, depending on the device pixel ratio. And on the Google website, you see, oh, in data saver mode, what is one option? Downgrade the quality. Instead of quality 90, go for quality 80 or quality 75, and you'll save bytes. Now, what is a big disadvantage of this approach? I told you I have 1 million product images. I already have 4 versions of these, so that means 4 million thumbnails. If I create a low quality version, it means I duplicate the amount of renditions. Not what I want. Another issue is performance, because I have a lot of long tail content, so the chance that some content is somewhere in the cache on my CDN is pretty low. Now the chance is even smaller. So performance-wise, this is also not optimal. So another option is, and that's the easiest option, just get rid of that source set tag and always serve the 1x version. That will also result in smaller quality. So that's like very easy. The downside is, for me, that the quality was a bit really too low. So I had a lot of byte savings, but the quality was like too low for me. So approach 3 is what I call downgrade quality. And what this does is you basically reuse the previous DPR. So here 2x is normally 320 pixels. You serve that to the 3x version. The 2x version, instead of getting the 320 pixels version, you get the 240 pixels version. Now with this approach, you downgrade quality, but you reuse all your renditions, and you reuse, let's say, the cache keys on your CDN or in your varnish or whatever that is. So the positive thing is, quality-wise, for me, that was great. Downside is, of course, the amount of byte savings is reduced. And so that's just a trade-off you will need to do. Now, this morning, I woke up very early and took the Eurostar from Brussels to London. And what happens if, let's say, on the European side, I'm in full mode, and then after I say, oh, now here I need to pay attention to my, let's say, to my phone bill, and you do context switching. The worst thing that can happen is having a full version in your browser cache, all the full quality images, and then say, oh, now I need data saver mode, and then suddenly start downloading all the lower quality images. That's not ideal. So that's something to be aware of. So there are 2 options there. You can either work with a service worker. So I have a service worker installed for offline usage and push notifications. So that was like an easy thing to do. So what I do is, when the browser triggers a request for the full version, I first check in the cache if I have it, and then I serve it out of cache. Otherwise, I check, is the save data header present, and I rewrite the request to the lower quality. So although the HTML says, give me version 240, I don't have it in cache, so now give me version 160. This sounds like, oh, perfect. And I have already a service worker, perfect. I decided not to do it. Why? Service worker, when does it work? After the second page view. So for first-time users coming in via Google, search engine optimization, etc., First version they get is the full version. Not ideal. And also when JavaScript is disabled, you have some issues. Now typically those users disable JavaScript because they also want to save as much bytes as possible. Origin or your CDN, doesn't matter. I will now show Akamai CDN because that's what I work for, but in theory I think you can apply this to any other CDN or Nginx. You just let the browser do its work, so you still reference the full version, let's say 240 pixels. And when a request comes in at the edge, you detect is the data saver mode present, and then you do a rewrite of the request. So you serve the 160 version, although the user requested the 240 pixels version. If you do this, you have full cache control. It works from the first request. It works if you don't have JavaScript. It works if you don't have Service Worker installed. It's always working. Step 6. Inform the users. How many have implemented data saver mode on their website? 1. Now, the downside is, for your end users, although they enable data saver mode, none of their websites, or maybe a few, take that into account. So if they suddenly come to your website and you decide, oh, I ship lower quality images, I make the user experience on purpose a bit bad, they don't know that you did it on purpose. So as soon as data saver mode is enabled, I tell my users, this is what I did. I also now have the link to toggle it on or off. So I basically set a cookie so they can override it for my own website. And then in order to still make the users happy, so this is one of the 500,000 scale models in my database, I, for example, say, hey, if you want to see the full box art image, if you want to see that nice image, just click on it. And I also add the cost. So they have an idea, is it worth clicking on it or not? So that's informing the users. The last step is monitoring. Who heard about the term performance budget? A few, that's good, perfect. Now, before data saver, in theory, when you save data, the goal was make performance better. And if you save enough data, performance gets better. Now we saw that actually by removing some data, like for example the low quality image placeholders, I don't make the performance better. I can make it actually worse. That triggering the infinite scroll a little bit later is worse for performance in favor of big data. So I now split, instead of doing everything at once, I look at my performance budget and I look at my data budget. How many bytes do I ship independently of the performance? And why do I talk about a matrix? First, I ship different amount of bytes based on if it's mobile, desktop, or tablet. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension is DPR. How many bytes you ship? Yeah, it depends on the device pixel ratio. If I send a 480 pixel thumbnail or the 160 pixel thumbnail, that's a huge difference. And then the third dimension is data saver mode, because my budget might be perfect under data saver mode, but I might be completely over it in non-data saver mode. So here an example. This is a default desktop version, so you see as soon as you go to 3x, the amount of bytes explodes. It's still reasonable. This is the home page, so but you see that the amount of bytes explode. And then when data saver is on, you see straight away a drop. And depending on the 2x, 3x, it's still okay. Why does the data still shift? At that point in time, I didn't implement it 100% correctly on every single page. So here and there, I still had like a 2x version loading. And I also have advertising on the website, which can vary also a lot. So, and then the same for mobile. And actually what you see is on mobile, I no longer see 1x devices. And here you see this explosion. And when the data saver is on, it's like roughly 50% for an iPhone. So that's the thing I started with, that the lightweight version serves 50% of the full version. And this is I run every day, so I set up this performance budget, and this is how I continuously validate that everything is under control. So it's no longer one number, because which of these numbers do you take? None of them is correct. It's a matrix. So to summarize, listen to your users. Because if they say, please, 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 save data, why ship them all the useless things or too many bytes? And it's also about finding the balance. There is no good or wrong. I now have 260 kilobytes. Can I bring the needle to 200 kilobytes? Yes, but yeah, you need to find the balance depending on your website. So, are there any questions? Yes?
Hi. So are there any things we shouldn't optimize because the browser is doing it, if that makes sense? So does switching on turbo mode, or I'm going to call it turbo mode, not a nicer name, are there things that the browser then chooses to do which we on the server side shouldn't be responsible for?
Yeah. So shall I repeat the question for the recording? Yes. So the question is, if in turbo mode is enabled, what does the browser do? So if the browser is, if your website is in HTTP, then the browser Chrome will intercept, for example, all your image requests and do for you some automated things. Now it's 2019. How many websites are still running on HTTP? Not that much. I know I proposed to the Chrome team, like, why should we as website owners decide to remove, let's say, the 2x version and the 3x version? Wouldn't it make sense if data saver mode is enabled that the browser ignores 2x, 3x, and then, I fully agree with that, but today it's not the case.
Okay.
Nothing. So before HTTPS, your website is exactly the same when it's enabled or not. Unless you do something special. Yes. Any additional questions? Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Are there any situations where data saver mode will be enabled automatically without the user knowing? So a 2G connection or low battery mode on your device will automatically do that for you?
So the question is, like, does the browser send that header under certain conditions without the user knowing? Not that I'm aware of. I know that Chrome is like looking to automatically do that. Oh, if you have a bad connection, do X, do Y, but not in production as far as I know. There was, Andy?
So, do you use prefetching for the next page? Radical's prefetch.
No, I don't use prefetch, but that would be something you have to disable in case data saver mode is enabled, because the last thing you want to do is that you ship bytes in favor of performance, and with the risk that you send too many bytes. So that would have to be disabled as well. Yes, correct. Yes?
You talked about sort of savings you make on images as a model, but overall, what is sort of the difference in sort of percentage of how much you save in data saving over a website?
So is the question like if I change a 2x version of an image to a...
No, let's say you load a page and it's 2 meg.
Yes.
In data saving mode, what typically do you think is a good percentage of that?
What would be a good target? Yes. So in my case it was I said around 40 to 50%. So it's significant. The question is that was my view. It also depended like what are the easy things I can do without programming evenings and evenings and evenings to make it perfect. At a certain point in time, it's like, okay, this is what it is. Am I happy? Yes. Can it be better? Yes, but I don't have time for it. So although I explained plenty of different options, this version was basically released in, let's say, 2 evenings of work for adapting the website. Yes. Yeah, sure.
How did you get into this? Was it just something you decided you wanted to do, or did you see an article? Or,
I guess so I'm constantly on Twitter, and I guess that it was one of the articles or one of the things I saw. Like, hey, but I can't remember which one. Yes. Yeah, sure.
So, like, for example, the reducing the number of rated articles, have you seen a reduction in click-throughs to follow-up articles?
That's a good question. So basically, do I see different user behavior when data saver is enabled? The first thing is, for example, I see bounce rate when data saver is enabled is much, much higher than regular users. Now, I don't I'm not sure if this is basically because I did it wrong or because these users are anyway very data minded and they don't click unless they really want to click. So what I guess is people are on their mobile phone, bad connection, they do a Google search, they find the information, and they're not that interested in going further. So I'm not sure if that's linked to my setup or just a regular thing. That might be a good thing to check on any of your websites. If you don't do anything, validate the business data, let's say session length or amount of pages based on that header without making any changes.
It's just interesting because if you've decided that something isn't adding much value to the user, why serve that anyway?
Yeah.
Why not just not send it to
Yes.
anyone?
Yes, but that's a good thing, is there are certain things which I evaluated and just removed entirely without, let's say, without doing this. Yes, makes sense.
Tim, probably only have time for one more question. I'm going to reserve that question. That's
Perfect.
Lydia, do you want to come up and start getting set up? So I'm just wondering, like, do you make more money? Like, do you make more or less money from people who have data saver enabled? And if you serve the full fat version to someone who doesn't want it, are they less likely to spend money?
Yeah, so my revenue model is advertising, so the more pages people look at, the better. And I also have like affiliate marketing, so you can look up, oh, I want this kit, and you can see the 20 shops around the globe where you can buy it, and each time when people click on it, I earn a bit of money. I'm not. What I hoped to see was like if I enable data saver mode, that that they would increase usage, or that in certain countries I would see a bigger impact. But I don't. I see an increase, but it might also be natural. So I don't have like a definitive marketing answer. I got rich because I implemented Save Data Header.
Would you say that doing this project has been worth it in the sense that it has made you a return, or do you think it's just the right thing to do?
So what I know is from those, because I have very close relationship with my end users, they can log in. So those users, like the user who said like I live in the wilderness, he now uses the website more often than before. So that's one thing. And he said, oh, great that you do this for me. So, and that's like invaluable because they now also post on Facebook, or they like whenever I post something on Facebook. So there is like an indirect return as well by delighting your users.
Okay. Sounds
Cool.
good to me. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.